Something extraordinary happened on Tuesday, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. I won't say which we are, but in Virginia, not only did the Democratic gubernatorial candidate win by 9 points, otherwise expected to be a very tight race, but there were candidates running for the House of Delegates, the state legislature, in districts that had not fielded Democrats in years. And Politico did a really interesting piece on this today. It turns out a lot of the candidates, many of whom won, were in fact women who had become politically active in the age of Trump. And I guess the first question I want to throw out there, and maybe Erin could get us kicked off, is there something about the Trump era that has created a cultural moment in which women are both becoming more engaged and more essential to the political process?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. A lot of things are happening that are making women more engaged. I think women woke up on November 9th and had a collective, holy shit. We almost got to the mountaintop, whether you loved her or didn't love her, or voted for her or didn't. When you come that close to a historic, global shift, and the most powerful person in the world is a woman, and to be that close from it, I think is, you feel it both in your heart and your head. And we saw a lot of things at VoteRunLead following the election. All of a sudden, we now actually, as of Tuesday, which was kind of a blessing, 10,000 women have signed up with us to learn how to run for office. That is, yes. So they're taking a web class, they're signing up for training. And so what you saw was qualifications. Many looked up and saw an underqualified man win over an overqualified woman. And for a lot of older women, that was something they had seen in their careers for many, many years. For about a third of women that we heard from, it was democracy. What happened with the voting system, the electoral college versus the popular vote, what? And then for another third of women, it felt like every issue was on the agenda now. That it wasn't, every issue was vulnerable. So those three things around a shift in women's qualifications, all of a sudden you felt women go, I can do that. I can do that. If he can do that, I can do that. And that was part of the sort of chant that we felt around the country. We also saw some historic women of color win in the Senate, some local alumni like Ilhan Omar for Somali American in Minnesota, where there was some glimmers of hope. So women looked up, and oftentimes when things are a mess, we get the opportunity to come in and clean up. But I think now we have the opportunity to make our presence permanent in political life.
Liz, you've been an elected official for about 2 decades now, right?
16 years.
16 years. Is there something unique about the moment we're living in right now?
Well, following up, I think it's absolutely true. For years, when I would talk to women about running for office, you'd have to drag them kicking and screaming. In fact, I got dragged kicking and screaming against my will into running for office. And you'd hear all the time women say, I'm not qualified to do that. I'm not ready to do that. I think last November, woke up a huge percentage of women going, oh, hell, I could do better than he is. Just like, what do you mean I'm saying I'm not qualified to do this? I can't believe that man was allowed to run for any office. I know I can do better. I also think the panic, as Erin said, on issues is so across the board, regardless of party, region, urban, suburban, rural, that people are also saying, I can't sit back and not be part of this process. So we're seeing incredible organizing around not just running for office, but being more and more involved in civic life. And it's disproportionately women. I'm seeing women at all these resistance groups and meetings, women coming to me talking about how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. So I think the momentum is there, and I think you're right, it's not going to go away. Now, there weren't enough running in this year to see a major turnover, although in certain places we did. Look at the Virginia races. But I think we're going to see, out of these 10,000 women who said they want to run for office, a real waterfall effect. I also, just in closing, want to say, when things are disturbing out there in the public eye, sexual harassment of people, distrust, criminality, people tend to trust women more. And so there's a very positive response to women candidates by men and women. Now, maybe when there are more of us in office, we won't look so trustworthy, but we don't get in trouble as much as the men. There are not that many of us, but we don't seem to get in the same trouble. So I find when talking to people, they're like, Well, you're honest and hardworking, and you're probably not going to, try to grab my teenage daughter if she volunteers in your office. So I think that's also an impact.
Christina, we were talking earlier before we got on stage. It takes something pretty steely to run for office. It's not for everyone, but you teach politics, political history, political science. What are the other ways that we need to get women and men, but particularly for today, how do we get women involved in the process who don't necessarily want to go run for office?
Right. I mean, not everyone's going to have the dynamic personality of a Liz Krueger, and not everyone wants to be in the limelight. Now, keep in mind, there are, you all probably know this better, there are, 30,000 elected positions across the United States that people
510,000 local and federal positions across the country. Dog catcher.
So I was off by a few numbers, right? So, you could run for district leader, you could run for school board president. I mean, there's so many things. You don't have to be a state senator or a member of, the House or the Senate. There are really important positions in your community, but also, I have no desire to run. Everyone's always like, why aren't you gonna run? I'm like, no thanks. I don't wanna straighten my hair and take out my nose ring and all that other stuff. So, and there were, I have this whole section of the Baltimore years, I call it, that are just, we won't talk about this. So, because of that, I do other things, right? So I support women who are running. So I have friend raisers. I'm a professor. I am not an iBanker. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a ton of money. However, I do know some people who have money, right? And so I bring people together. I think that's a skill set. Everyone's good for something. So I'll have friend raisers just to, introduce people to new ideas or to other potential candidates. Really trying to think about the pipeline. Making sure that I donate $5 to $10 to different organizations that mean something to me every month. So as Susie Orman says, pay yourself first. Well, so I pay myself first in my savings, but I also pay other groups first before I start spending that money. So that money goes to FIERS, Planned Parenthood, certain, Brooklyn Bail Fund, all these small organizations that actually really need this $10, $15, NPR obviously gets our $15 every month. And so, people who are actually doing the work. And then when it comes time for campaigning, I right now am all on board for Stacey Abrams, who's a black woman who's running for governor of Georgia. She's got a hard primary in May, and then, if she makes it, she could be the first black female governor in the history of the United States. We've had 0. And so because of that, I want to be part of, sort of black women across the country who puts in the first black female governor in the history of the United States. But we could also put in a female governor in Georgia. So, letting people know about, candidates that you're interested in, or if someone has an idea that they're thinking about running, support it, cultivate it, introduce them to people that just because we are a wealth of resources, no matter what sector you're in. Some people are just like, I'm too busy. And it's like, well, if you're too busy making money, that's okay. Money's not a bad thing. It's what you do with money. You can just give us money and we can figure out what to do with it in a good way, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Exactly. You know exactly what to do with it. And so I think, also I will leave you with this, putting that monthly donation for the work, right? We can't wake up every 2 years or 4 years and say, oh, we should probably pay attention to the presidential election or the particular Senate race that's going on, because all these people are in a pipeline that get us to the presidency or Senate or a House race, right? So we need people in the state legislature, in the state Senate, so that one day they can run for Congress.
I like state government.
I know. Well, state government's really important because that's where so much action is about education, about our ovaries, about our kids, about our water, about our air. All of these things are really important, but we need really smart people in the state legislature so that we can then put them in the federal government, and then they can be in the pipeline for greater offices.
Do you perceive, maybe this is a question to throw to Liz first, do you perceive a difference in the way that you interact with your Republican colleagues who are women in Albany and, let's say, men who are in your Democratic caucus? And I guess then I would ask Erin, this isn't just a progressive/democratic imperative, right? I started it with Age of Trump, but we got to get women across the board involved in politics at every level, right?
Well, I'm partisan because I actually think the Democrats have better answers for this country and for the state. But yes, we actually have more women in the Senate who are Republicans than Democrats in New York State. And we often talk to each other about the fact that, we go out to dinner and we talk issues. And the men are like, what do you mean you're crossing party lines? I go, it's dinner. You know, and you have human conversation, and we talk policy issues. We talk about frequently, and it's one of the reasons why I think we all are better off if we see more women elect office. We're better at negotiating problems. I think women are. I think we see it in the business community, and I know I see it in politics in New York. You hit this wall, and you have to sit down to get things done. And I just find that women elected officials are more willing to put the ego aside, sit down at the table, say, we have to get this done, so we're just going to figure out how we do it. And so, frankly, I think we do end up with better government if we have more reflection of who the public is, which is 51% of us are women. In the New York State Senate, 15% of us are women. So my bias would be Democratic women, but I think we all win when we see more women at these tables, when we see more people of color at these tables. How can you have people who don't reflect the population that they're supposed to be representing? You just don't get the government you should.
I want to say, I think Republican women, 2 Republican women senators are saving our democracy right now. If Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were not there, we would be in a very different situation as a country. So we are sort of newsflash, calling all socially progressive, liberally conservative women, we are desperate for you. Desperate. What was missing from Tuesday's election was this wave of those women running for office and stepping out. We have a national conference coming up in about a week. Women who I know who were past state legislators, who were Republicans, are now signing up as do not identify with either party. This is dangerous. We need women's issues, women's leadership to be on the agenda of every single party in this country. We need those voices. And so what I think we're seeing is this sort of missing conversation from conservative women or moderate Republican women, or there used to be progressive Republican women and conservative Democrats back in the day. That it's not just a grid, that people can have different views on different issues. Women work together across the aisle. We're better on education. We're better on the environment when we work together. States that have women's caucuses with both Republican and Democratic women get more done. They have deeper personal relationships, so they're able to talk to one another. We do the business of government better, bring back more money to our districts. And so the case is made to look at the Republican Party and go, where is your 15% women in the New York State Senate? Why isn't it 51%? To hold both parties accountable to women's leadership, to the chairmanships at a local level, and to making sure that they're running and endorsing candidates who are women. Because I think what ends up happening is then you have this extreme woman on the right who is this foil to, what is mostly a majority of women. 7 in 10 women in this country are pro-choice. Women make up the majority of people who make minimum wage. Like, there are issues, I think it's something like 7 in 10 women are also for more safer gun control, that are cross-partisan, that women can get it done. So I think it's really critical that we keep an eye out and we make sure that women's issues don't just live in a single party, that we move the entire agenda.
Christina, when you look at last year and then you go in, you teach a class full of students, men and women, how do you make the compelling case? Like, what's the forward-looking state of this? How can you look at a race like 2016, ignore the fact that the 2 candidates were held to 2 incredibly different standards, and then say, but I want to get more of my students involved in politics, you should try? Like, what's the way out of that paradigm?
Well, I think a lot of young people are just really disgusted with politics. And so the way that I'm trying desperately to keep them encouraged, and I have a student here today, is to let them know that they are part of the solution. I can't fix it. I mean, I'm trying to fix it, but my contribution is to essentially breed a whole new generation of really thoughtful, interesting people who may not share the same exact ideological bent, but can negotiate, speak to one another, respect the different ideas, but come to the table and maybe convince someone that all issues are women's issues, right? Women are really great at sort of introducing women's issues to men and sort of helping them see it as a larger framework, right? Reproductive rights isn't just a women's issue. Education isn't a women's issue. It's everyone's issue. So I'm really trying to keep them animated and realize that even though it looks as though the country is crumbling, the Constitution is just being stretched and bent in a way that the framers warned us about and possibly protected us for it. And so helping them understand the past so that they can deal with the present right now. The Constitution holds as far as I'm concerned. Keep in mind I was 3/5 of a person in the Constitution. So for me to say that lets me know that I fundamentally believe in the durability of the Constitution. And so they themselves can actually push it in a direction. And so I really try and encourage all of my students to see themselves and think of themselves as the future governor or the future senator of their state. I think geography is a really important demographic. I think a lot of people are really proud of where they're from, and they understand where they're from in a way that is really unique, especially millennials. And they have issues that they genuinely care about, whether it's the environment, whether it is about reproductive rights, or whatever it may be. And so the great thing about teaching at a parochial school at this moment is that I actually do have a lot of Republican students. I have a lot of hardcore Democratic students. I've got some libertarians and some people who were just kind of a little bit confused. So, I'm confused too. So helping them realize, though, that you can sit next to a Republican all semester, even if you are a hardcore Democrat, and learn how to speak to them, but also understand, why is it that you believe in this? Why is it that this makes sense to you? Why is it that, say, Jeff Sessions makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. I don't get it. But maybe through the course of 14 weeks, we can have a series of dialogues. We don't have to agree, but we do have to kind of come to some sort of foundation of dissension and conversation to move us forward. Because whatever we've been doing hasn't fully been working, and it's really turning off young people. And my job is to really just get them engaged and help them realize that these problems will not solve themselves if they remove themselves from the equation.
So we had 7 women run for on the Democratic side for the primaries here in New York, and 2 went on and got elected on Tuesday, which was great. But the 5 that didn't said what an amazing process it was to run for office, to get to know your neighbors. Now they have all this political capital that they're able to spend within the party. I mean, there are task forces, there are commission, there's a women's, the gender thing just got announced this summer. There's so many in the New York City Commission. There's your co-op boards, right? So you don't necessarily have to be a state senator or running for Congress to have a position of power to make decisions about where money gets spent in your community. At the end of the day, it's the allocation of resources and the social contract within your little geographic region to say, I want this place to be healthy and whole. And if we have more women stepping up into positional power in civic life, running for office, getting on those boards and commissions, you will see that money get spent much, much better and be distributed in a way that feels more fair, where you can have both a park, and green space and economic development, and so, yeah.
Well, I was saying in New York City, sometimes people say, well, it's 8.5 million people. If I'm not gonna run for one of these offices, how do I get involved? So we've broken up the city of New York into 59 different community boards. You can get appointed to a community board. They meet on every imaginable issue. They have subcommittees. You can actually spend every night of your life at your community board. But they are thoughtful people who care about their neighborhoods and their community. They make pass resolutions. They show up to tell their elected officials, here's what we need in our community. And I always tell people who want to run for higher offices, I say, unless you're starting at US Senate or president, you better hear what your community boards are demanding, because that's who you're going to have to face once you get elected, because they don't go away and they bring issues. And I love that. It's sort of like little Vermont town hall meetings for New York City. It breaks it up into pieces where neighborhoods and neighbors can have real say and put amazing pressure on their elected officials to do what their communities want. So maybe you will want to run for president someday, but you're thinking, I've got kids, I've got to keep the job, I've got lots of things to do right now. Check out the community board if you live here.
Or district leader. I mean, I always tell people New York is the tiniest town I've ever lived in, so keep your nose clean, right? I mean, this is a small place. But I also think that, a lot of people work on these failed campaigns, and they think, well, it didn't work out. But I mean, I'm writing a book right now on all the failed campaigns of Black people who have run for the presidency. It's been almost 60 in the past 150 years. But what they do is really important institution building, right? When you run a campaign, you have people who have to know about finance, people have to know about every single block in the neighborhood. I mean, so all of these people also ultimately they get involved in politics and run themselves, depending on what it is. So when Jesse Jackson ran in 84 and 88, Donna Brazile, I know that's like a buzzword today, but Donna Brazile worked on the campaign, Dinkins was the finance chair, Mayor Wilson Goode, first black mayor of Philadelphia, worked in the Philadelphia section. So all these sort of black mayors that rose up after Jesse Jackson worked on this failed campaign. So when you all work on these campaigns, it's just, you're really just planting the seeds for other sort of political discourse later on down the line that you might not be able to see.
And Shirley Chisholm, 1972, run for the presidency.
Barbara Lee worked on the campaign as a volunteer.
You have to watch that documentary. It's called Unbought and Unbossed. It's fantastic. And what you will see her do is, what she is trying to do is go around the country and get delegates. She knows she's not going to win the nomination, but she's collecting delegates so that she can go into the Democratic convention and actually help decide what the platform is. So you have to appease my 21 delegates, and these are the things I want to see in the political platform of my party. What she's doing is she's wielding and spending her political capital, and that's what we're not doing enough of in this country as women. It's like we're one giant monolithic voting block, like a kid on a soccer field where like all 12 chase the ball when they're only 6 years old. They think that's how we vote. But unless we're spending political capital in other ways where we are maxing out and giving more money to women candidates and male candidates, we're not spending as much in political donations as our male counterparts. Getting on these commissions and boards where you're able to look at a bunch of resumes that might come through for some appointees for the governor's office. So it's that kind of political capital, getting involved with your political party. Get on these lists for $5 and $10 contributions. Next thing you know, someone's going to pick up the phone and call you. So what are the ways in your community that you can build and spend political capital? And then eventually you might get the bug to run for office and call me. We'll get you there, no problem, doing it all the time. And then we really need you to run as you are. We don't need you to fit into some other mold. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to take your nose ring out or straighten your hair, right? That's the kind of wave we want to see that we saw on Tuesday, and that hopefully we will see continue in the 2018 and local elections all the way to 2020, where women get to run as they are.
What do you say to people who would reply, well, I'm not a very political person. I'm a technologist, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm a policy person. Liz, you worked in public policy work before you ran for office. When people say I'm not political with a small p, what's your response to that, any of you?
I say, if you're pissed about something and you're not getting involved, you're the part of the problem. So I think that people want to be part of the solution. You don't know how many hats you can wear in your life, except your generation actually is being told you're going to have to wear a whole lot of hats, a lot more than my generation and the generation before. So we are multitaskers, and women are extraordinary multitaskers. So I say, nope, what is it that you care about? Start looking on how you can get involved in that, how you can make a difference. And yes, running for elected office the way I did, I was told to test the thickness of your skin more than anything else you'll do in life. And I didn't know what that meant until I ran for office. And then I learned, oh, yes, it does. And wow, I had a much tougher thickness of skin than I imagined. So I had one of the campaigns against me was by a gentleman, all negative all the time. He outspent me 10-1. It was attack, attack, attack. My family was like, oh my God, how do you put yourself through this? And I just kept saying, I know that's not who I am. I know who I am. I know what I believe in and why I'm doing this. This is just noise. I don't care about the noise. So, but you learn along the course of your life that there are different paths you can take and that you might take. But I would urge, as women, really, really think hard about whether this is something you can do, because I find men are born and go, I'm going to be president someday. They popped out of the womb. They're 2 years old and they're going to be president. And we need a lot more women to actually go, I could just as much be president as that 2-year-old.
I mean, the first week of every class, I ask people to raise their hand if they think about running for office, and it's always usually 2 white men in the class who raise their hand. And so my job is just to keep reminding people, I call my students by their state. So the governor from such and such, the senator from such and such, just to constantly just keep putting it in their minds. But I think also, you have to want to be a public servant too, right? I mean, in some ways, it's a calling. I mean, I'm sure you spend a lot of time thinking about other people, not your family, not yourself, right? And that's not for everyone. That's why I always try and remind people that there's so many other positions in the political world where you can support electeds, or you can be very political and involved without necessarily being the principal yourself.
And I have to do the shameless plug. I mean, I have to. But check out VoteRunLead. Check out the women that have run for office. We had 35 women out of 41 candidates win on Tuesday, and they include Andrea Jenkins, the first transgender woman in Minneapolis. Do you think anybody told her, like, yeah, you'll be a shoo-in for public office? Definitely not. So it's go there, see some of the amazing women that are running, see some of the amazing women that are bringing their families along with them. It's like, no, be quiet, mommy's on a panel. It's amazing the transformation that's happening locally. We really need to bottle it and sort of be selling that or giving it away for free. But it's that there really are women doing remarkable things at a local level all across the United States, as well as a state and national level, who you'll look at them and you'll go, oh, she can do it, I can definitely do it, because I don't have 3 kids, I'm not a refugee from Somalia, right? Like, I got this. My life's been a bit easier. I am able to schedule it in differently. And it just takes that lens that, like, politics is so for someone else, it just really pulls the sort of shades away.
I'll make this personal promise. If any of you here wants to run for office after hearing this panel, I'll get Brian O'Kelly, our CEO, to write a really big check. So I do hope someone will do it.